Welcome back, Source Nation. Tonight, we're going to have this discussion, and I am so happy that Mr. Phillip Gillon is in the studio with me this afternoon. Phillip, how are you today?
Yes, how's it going?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm great, man. It's a pleasure to have you on. You know, we've been kind of talking back and forth here and there, had some gaps in our communication, but, well, let's move ahead. It's a pleasure to have you on, and what we want to discuss is how understanding the Constitution helps improve personal development. And so with that said, just give us a little bit of who you are, your background, and what got you interested in understanding the Constitution so we can work with it and then use it in our everyday lives.
All right. Well, my name is Professor Phil. I'm a paralegal by trade. I've been in the business of salvaging relationships with the government, with the private sector and financiers, especially the financial community among people that are not so fortunate, especially people that are not at liberty of having large amounts of equity to play in the game, the marketplace we call life. That one that we want to enjoy, but the only benefit we can get from it is working for someone else. So interjecting myself into the system itself, I practiced for a good 15 years, about 7 actually, and about 9 in the realm of going in and doing things on myself, improving my skills, and providing vast amounts of information to I guess you could say, debunk the system, yet and still use the system properly to possibly turn it into a I guess you could say a better internal system that we can function on. And after testing the system out, exercising by using it properly, and then inducing it into a more commercial and flexible way of negotiating, I found myself being able to almost make friends with the agents, so to speak, federal, state, local, and my main thing now is local because our biggest problem is being able to sponsor, create, and control our consumption, our power for branding and soliciting, and most importantly, our local economies that provide a sufficient amount of economical structure that creates civility that we can all live by. And because those principles are almost crippled because the system itself disenfranchises the way it does business with people of minority status that they would consider a minority, where the majority would be able to benefit the most from. The last 4.5, maybe 5 years, I've kind of dedicated my time to restructuring it so we have some type of absolute power without having to indulge in the disenfranchised establishment of going and asking them for something, but instead being able to introduce things, being able to control our soliciting margins.
Let me ask you a quick question. If you had to explain that to an 8th grader, how would you explain that?
Well, I would explain it in such a way that I say, here's 5 crayons. If I give you 2 and I get 3, you think that's fair? And he's probably going to say, well, not really. I mean, I can deal with 2, but it would be nice to have a 3rd. So the idea is to any child, for instance, is that if I'm going to give you if I'm going to introduce something that allows you to have the entire crayon pack, the idea is that there's 20 in the pack. You have to learn certain attributes so that each crayon becomes something of value that you'll hold and cherish, so that anytime you want to share those crayons, you distribute them, you control them, and you tell the other party how you want them to be used. This is what I would tell an 8th grader as I would tell a grown person. The same disenfranchisement that comes with the lack of control over the crayons is the same emphasis for control over your Constitution, the premises of contracting, and the way you do business, so that your community can grow, and you don't need anyone else's assistance to do so.
Why do you think Yeah, well, one of the things that we learned is that, basically everything is a contract. Uh,
Right.
Everything that we do in life basically is a contract. Why do you
Mm-hmm.
think that over a period of time, especially when we leave school, that is minimized on a day-to-day basis outside of when we are making transactions? And when I say transactions, if we go into the store, if we go into a car dealership to buy a car, we sit down, we sign a contract. If you're going to finance furniture, you sit down and you sign a contract. But outside of that, why is it, do you think, that just contracting in and of itself is minimized on a day-to-day basis?
The majority of the contracts that we sign are based on the fact that we had no knowledge of what we're necessarily signing. And then the downside is that the bottom line is the principle, which is to make money. The upside to what they think the spending is based on, which is us, the consumer, is that since having no knowledge of it, is going to be able to provide that equilibrium of understanding, which is I'm giving you something, and in exchange for it, you're giving me something. So effectively, like any good, let's say a good slave. Let's use a slave, for example. A slave is very good if they effectively don't have a clue about the rates in which his insolvitude is based on. So if you say your enslavement is based on $6 an hour, and slaves that have a free mind, that have begun to understand what they're actually signing up for, the slave that has the minimal amount of understanding but the maximizing skill, just like if you took, they called them bucks back in the day, you took a young man and you broke him and you got the maximum amount of labor but the minimum amount of intelligence from him. This keeps the idea of consumerism at the base rate of exchanges at an all-time high, based and induced to those in which are the hardest workers, the largest consumers, but the intellectual base so fragmented that even if you did read it, you still probably wouldn't understand it. So
okay, so basically what you're saying is it's a play of ignorance. It is ignorance that keeps the slave because they don't truly understand the contract, and because they don't understand some of the words in it, they refuse to read the entire contract period.
Or even the concept of contracting. If they told you
Right.
you're signing only for certain premises or rights or benefits or exchanges, then the sole agreement between you and the individual that you're signing for or signing as are going to have, so I guess you can almost say a conflict of interest on the very basis of the fact that even if you were given knowledge of it, once you signed it, your ignorance was almost voided at the contract signing. So it just takes advantage of all the loops of having a natural knack to negotiate and to understand what kind of negotiational contract you're signing up for.
Now let's connect this to personal development, and let's connect this to how it's applicable in our day-to-day lives, because understanding the contract, there are a great deal of people who don't want to go back and review the Constitution. That's just not what they're going to do.
Right.
So, and we know that personal development is about knowledge attainment. That's really what it's about. And so how do we connect the two? Understanding what you're saying so we can apply it daily, so that ultimately we develop ourselves to the highest level that we could potentially develop ourselves and optimize what the Constitution has given us the right to do as a citizen of this nation.
Question everything, verify anything. That means if you question it, there's a process where they have to verify the language, and to the extent of the language, like for instance, if you go get a Honda and it says 17% could be added if you default, you can say, well, you know what? Do me a favor, send this word default to your legal your legal division. And the division will have to respond, giving you exactly what default means. Now, the reason why you want to do something like this is because it can have 100 variables. The legal terminology of it is going to be based on what you, of course, you'll assume that default means that when you fail to pay, they can add on to something on the basis of what the way it's stipulated. Okay, so if it says it could be 17% can be added based on default, that's kind of the basis of the agreement on what the legal department is going to tell you when they send you a letter saying we can repossess this property if you don't pay 17% plus principal. So you're looking at the contract along with what they sent you, and you're saying to yourself, wow, that's kind of funny. I didn't even read that small, not the fine print, but the definition of what they're after. What's their primary motive of making money based on your ignorance is whether or not you've read it or you can interpret it properly. In some cases, for instance, when I went into I went to get a little health checkup. They gave me a contract, and what I did is I actually started because I was kind of slick about it. I duplicated the contract before I even stepped in there, and I had certain sections that were already edited and took out. The reason why is because there's certain information I don't want them to divulge to the federal government. When they sent it for insurance purposes, which was kind of funny. I'm like, I don't have insurance. So what are they sending me a letter for to confirm whether or not that was a contract I signed? And so I responded to the insurance provider, yes, that is the one. And so now the hospital, not the hospital, but the clinic doesn't get a kickback on an insurance claim that I didn't even pay for. I didn't even have insurance on me. So here it is, they're insuring something and getting a kickback from something I already paid for, or what you would call a prepaid service. Since it's prepaid, the legal terminology of prepaid is something that's post-pay until paid on a later date. If they count that as, say, petty cash, they can turn around and make an insurance claim against you simply because even though you didn't sign anything, but you signed a contract that says, and it says, it's so vague, it's almost impossible to know that that's what they mean, is they put in there, okay, go ahead, I'm sorry. Yep.
No, that's fine. What I want you to hold that thought. But what I want to do is, you were talking about default, because that's a huge term in our society. Whether it's defaulting on student loans, whether it's defaulting on a mortgage, on a car note. I want you to get into the definition of default so that people can understand what the legal meaning of default is, so that as they go out and they sign these contracts, then they'll know exactly what it means.
Okay. Well, that is exactly what I was kind of going to get to with the way they signed. Okay. They set up the contract. What they did in the contract was they said in so many words that since I wasn't able to provide myself insurance, the company could provide self-insurance if a premium is paid. Now it's pretty, it's right there in your face, but it's subjected to petty cash if it's a miscellaneous payment. So what they're saying is, and in a default sense, they say we can take your money as petty cash, but then we can turn around and pay a premium to go and hit an insurance provider over the head for something you already paid for. So default means, in that particular contract meant, if we default your payment, instead of making it look like you paid for a service, we'll make it look like you paid something towards a particular petty cash or miscellaneous charge that we charge you for, and then charge you the full price on an insurance claim that we created on your behalf. The same way as if they were to file a suit. Let's go into default, the word itself. In finance, a default is a failure to a legal obligation. Okay? And so this means that if I said that I would pay something, and then they said, well, looks like even though you said you were going to do it, you missed a payment. So you've gone into default. Upon default, they can file a claim on your behalf, almost like they're legally representing you by filing a claim in court. Most think, oh, okay, well, I'm a defendant, so that means that they're telling me I must have done something wrong. So I'm going to have to go in and defend myself. But the default is solely based on what you agreed to do. If you agreed to pay, and you default, one little small smidget of a few nickels and dimes can put you in default simply because they said in the clause that any faulted payment, and that means if you're $5 short, that's considered a fault. You can continue to pay them, and they can wind up filing a suit on you, all because you've agreed to pay it in full, but only what the balance requires you to pay. So if you have to pay $100 every month on say a car note, okay, and your lowest denomination is usually, and they're very adamant about you paying, but they're looking at it like if we default them, we make more money by taking the car back and reselling it than we would allowing him to keep the car and pay little smidgets of money that we don't feel like chasing after. $100 a month seems very petty, but if you look at the fact that you came up 5 cents short, that's considered a default, a legal obligation to pay. So they can use any failure, any one small piece of a failure, any part of the contract itself to make it look like a failure. It's almost it's an indulging an indulging sabotage on part of the way they want to make money. When they don't want you to have something based on their profits, they're going to find a reason to default you. At least they try to.
Let's take a quick twist here on this. What made you go into the details of understanding how to use the Constitution and how to truly understand contracts? Because we know that the United States in and of itself is a contract.
Mm-hmm.
We know that. So what made you pursue this knowledge?
Well, I was given just a little bit of some notation on a particular case. Me myself was incarcerated at the time, and guy came back, said, as much as I've talked to these people, these judges, they've always been constitutional. And I said, well, what's that supposed to mean? And this was a test on my particular case, by the way. I used it a little differently, but I changed it so that it only had one merit to it, and it was to question the monetary policy in the Constitution. So I went in front of him, and the judge said, now, after talking to this gentleman, he didn't put me up on anything. What he did was he said in so many words the Constitution on what would be a conditional basis of what the court had to accept, meaning what he gave them was based on a constitutional parameter. So I went up and looked up a bunch of constitutional articles, and my main article I kept bumping into was Article 1, Section 8. And Article 1, Section 8 pretty much said that the United States can borrow money. So the continuity of my way of going in and negotiating with the judge was going to be based on the monetary clause. If I have a right to it, then that means I have a right to get rid of it at the same time. In other words, if you're going to create money on behalf of the people and then use it against them, the same interpretation of discharging a duty actually by legal definition in the Constitution is considered a tax. If you look into the 16th Amendment, it specifically says duties, taxes, imposed, blah, blah, blah. They come up with a bunch of language, but the array of the language for duties means to discharge the public for an exemption or a right. This gives the corporations and the corporate entity called the United States the contract its financial grasp via the Article 1, Section 8. So I'm sitting in front of this judge, and I'm kind of twiddling my thumbs because it's all bouncing around. It's kind of making sense, but it's not. So I asked him, do I have constitutional rights? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay. Well, let me ask you something. If I have constitutional rights, if the United States borrows money to start this case, district attorney's eyes are like saucer plates right now because he's wondering where I got this from. And I said, Article 1, Section 8 allows the United States to borrow money. Now, my understanding is since you're borrowing that money, that's on the taxpayer's back, correct? Correct me if I'm wrong. Remember, I'm a youngster, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I have an idea. It's right there. I just don't quite got it. So he looks down at me and he says, yeah, it's on the taxpayers. So what? I say, well, I would say that if I was a taxpayer, that would make me a party to the Constitution. This is up for administrative review. Steps off the bench and walks to his lofty beautiful little magnolia table of an office, and he sits and he ponders, apparently because he sits for the next 5 minutes. After he tells me it's up for an administrative review, I'm still standing there. District attorney's just shuffling papers. I don't know what he just said. It makes no sense to me. Judge comes back, says, well, let me ask you something. Are you a taxpayer? I say, if I'm paying for this case, yes, I am. Well, case dismissed. Have a nice day, Mr. Gillon. And I walked out. How this all operates is very simple. I negotiated whether or not, if I'm going to pay for my own contract, if I'm going to pay for my own incarceration, that means I have a constitutional right to discharge it, just like discharging the duties of one's office. It goes hand in hand. So I'm like, wow, look what I just did. I just took the taxpayers' dollars, squashed the case, saved a bunch of money for the city of Chicago, where I'm originally from, and yeah, I did a great job. There's nobody coming in to do no grand jury. There's nobody coming in to be paid to come down and judge me, especially people that are not my peers and do not look like me. So I'd have to say I did a fairly good job.
So let me ask you this question. You know, we're listening to this, and the audience is loving it, I'm sure. But the question is, if one wants to begin understanding the Constitution, constitutional law as you do, where would you recommend they start?
The biggest place to start is, where does the money come from and where does it go? Article 1, Section 8 is your primary start. That's your stepping stone, because that tells you who's borrowing the money. Now, once you got the borrowing clause down, now you start adding how many of the U.S. companies are issued currency to do federal government work, okay? Once we get the federal government works down and who's contracted for those works, then we start looking at the pipeline between the private companies that are federalized and those federalized companies issuing stipends and huge amounts of grants and ridiculous amounts surplus to the states. Once you figure that out between the contracting continuity of federal government entities to the states, then you start looking at the pipeline from the states providing services to your city, counties, municipalities, and you start looking at it like, okay, now, how did I put all this small, it's a very short diagram, because when you start digressing to each entity that supplies other entities with currency, you begin to unravel how the system actually works, literally. And the Constitution is just one parcel of it. It's to show you how the entire system works on certain premises. Most of us are goal-oriented when it comes down to, okay, where's the policies? Where these laws they're creating? Laws are created for accountability purposes. Taxpayers pay for each and every account opened as what they call a bill. And like a bill, if you look up the word bill, if you were looking at billing, or what would be derived from bill is billing. Billing is to create a statement against someone else for a prepaid service or a paid service, especially if it's already borrowed. So if the fiscal balance is next year, they're borrowing new bill money this year. This is the reason why at the end of the year they ask you to send your W-2s in, because they're asking you to refund the government so that they can provide the same services they said they were going to provide last year. These are where these bills come from on the denomination of public surplus, meaning money coming out of our pocket is providing the same service that comes from those bills. When those bills come down, they go to the private agencies, and then the private agencies come in and basically say, okay, you can't do this, you can't do that, we're regulating this, we're controlling that. You small businesses have to do this, that, and the other. I mean, it's ridiculous. We create our own, we unfortunately create our own demise. We give them money and tell them, to operate constitutionally, but they're operating at a full capacity commercially. They're a business.
Okay. So I'm a mother of four, and I'm a single parent. And I need to be able to use what you just said on a day-to-day basis so that I can optimize, what my income is. So I can ensure that I understand the system and I can work within the system given my knowledge base. How does a mother of four single parent begin to work with this information so that she can apply it to help her raise her kids?
Let's say that she has full custody and she's talking to the baby father, or she's able to get what she wants from him. Effectively, she wants none of his money, but she wants to be able to be independent and thrive without necessarily having to negotiate for his money before a court. So she says, "Listen, only thing I want is this. It's all I want. If you sign this oath in this contract or a promissory note, this promissory note is based on a bill that would be passed by taxpayers, and taxpayers are going to pay for services my children are already getting. So since I don't want to rob you to pay Paul, that is, pay Paul to pay you, or as the single mother, you don't want to rob him to pay Peter to stay in office so that they can continue putting young people in jail and then turning around as they're exploiting the male, putting money in your hands to continue to allow the system to monetize that type of behavior. Okay, so if you want to get away from that type of monetizing behavior, the best way to do it is if I was a woman with 4 kids and had this type of knowledge, the first thing I would be doing, even before I had children, okay, I would be setting a contract in motion that basically constitutionally creates the characteristics of any bill that would be beneficial to the public as it would be in social engineer programs such as Social Security, child support, things of this nature. Instead of going and asking the government for this, I would cut them completely out by contracting directly with the individual that would become the liability in the future. So inducing him to turn into a creditor is allowing me to then turn around and tell the government, hey, he signed these bills. These bills are primarily based on social engineer programs that finance these entities that enterprise on basically using the laws against him. And instead of using the laws against him, I'd like to take the money or the monetary policy in the clauses of those particular bills and make them constitutionally available to myself. So it's kind of like saying the Social Security bill right now, the Social Security Act, it's billing is somewhere in the region of about $1.2 billion. All right. If there's $1.2 billion floating around and the government pretty much says we have this available every fiscal balance and no one's using it except for those that are retirees and things of this nature, then that particular bill would be something that I would want my future, if I had children already, I'd ask him to sign the Social Security bill and a promissory note along with an oath. This gives me the right to basically debit him in public and credit myself through the private sector. Instead of allowing these entities to come in and say, oh, okay, we'll get the money for that, these code enforcers to come in and enforce the code against the male and then send him to jail if he doesn't pay, well, now I just cut all the red tape. Now I no longer need the agencies to go do it because I can do it on my own. I can go file a claim. Boom. Social Security Administration sends me a debit statement showing how much he should make available, say that they're going to pay me, but that's ultimately having children is not a disability. But the age-old secret to socialism, like any other social contract, is that the construction of it is that somebody's already paying for it. So ultimately, before, let's say, the Obama administration, not Obama, I'm sorry, Bill Clinton's administration, before he touched that woman, and the Republicans said, okay, allocate all that money that's going to welfare to 2-year colleges. Those black women get off their butt in a matter of seconds, 68% spike, okay, in the education sector. So that's where the money's going. So that's where the women win. And what happens there is that they said, we're going to put the receipts in the state's hand, and if the state decides to incarcerate the male for not paying for what ultimately would be available in college surplus, it's no longer taxpayer money. These are all private contracts in the background running from one bill to the next. And it's no longer taxpayers' money putting you in jail or taxpayers' dollars anymore that's putting you in jail. This is the private sector coming in and saying, okay, Title 4D allows this private agency to come in and lock anybody up that doesn't pay pay what would be charged against them before the court. So here it is. Okay. I got 4 children. I got 1 contract. And, well, I would hope that I don't have multiple men. So here it is. I have one contract for 4 children, and I have a debit charge against that particular bill, and now I'm able to allocate. Allocate means I'm able to go to before court and say I'd like to enforce this contract. This is the benefits of the public trust. This is what's supposed to happen when when the private sector decides to jump in and try to do something on my behalf.
Okay, I got you. Got you. Source Nation, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to It's Your Time. Time is an acronym for Transform, Inspire, Motivate, and Empower. And we're speaking with host Phillip Gillon. And we are talking about or discussing how understanding the Constitution helps improve personal development. As I mentioned earlier, personal development is really about knowledge attainment. And what we're talking about is how we can simplify the Constitution to be used on a day-to-day basis by the everyday Jim and Jane. And so that's key because oftentimes as attorneys, we only hear the high-level legalese or the legal jargon, but in order to utilize it, we have to be able to speak a language that the everyday average Jim and Jane can understand. So, with that said, Professor Phil, what type of educational vehicles are out there that will allow the average everyday person to learn this information such that it can be understood because it's simple, and so that they can apply it?
I'm sorry, I missed that because I dropped and then I called back in. I don't know what just happened there. I'm sorry.
What I was saying was, how can the average everyday Jim and Jane have a simplified course in what you're discussing so that they can apply it on a day-to-day basis?
Well, the main premises of any type of negotiation, understanding what you're getting involved in and things of this nature, is people intrinsic value, which is nothing more than people that value what you're doing is the extension to what you're going to benefit from. So the intrinsic value of others are based on the values you put on what you're doing. So say
now,
it's
how would you define intrinsic for the 8-year-old?
Okay, intrinsic value is right. If I have a red ball and I'm sitting inside of a small, very small area where there's a little sand and there's things to play with, and there's another child that comes up to me and says, "I want to play with the ball with you." And the first thing that comes out of my mouth, unfortunately, the ignorant, this is what they tend to come with is, especially if they ask me if they want to play with my ball, and of course, if I'm that ignorant, I'm going to ask them, well, what's in it for me? The intrinsic value of someone doing an exchange, such as me giving you my red ball, is that me in exchange for that is enjoyment. I'm going to benefit from it immensely by smiling and enjoying things that are based on what children do. What it comes down to is what's the actual value of the ball, not the value of my activities, what I think, how I do it. No. Only on, that's why they say in business, keep your eye on the ball, because the ball is the real value. The ball is what you're going to pass to the next person, and then eventually it's going to come all the way full circle, and the ball is going to be uniquely the same exact way that you gave it out. And this is what a lot of people like to do in business, is they like to shape shift things so that it's formulated to their own liking. And this is the reason why a lot of people do not own businesses, because they want to dictate something they have to share with others. Let me repeat that. In business, you have to share with others. You can't take a ball and turn it into a brick and hand it to someone else and say, this is something you enjoy to play with. Because if it's not a ball, then all of us that's sitting at the park looking at each other and I'm handing the ball out and I'm saying, here's a brick. They're like, well, wait a minute, that was a ball. I want to enjoy the ball. And I'm saying, well, yeah, the brick is the equivalent ones. That's what I thought up. I think that's it's pretty unique to have fun with. And everybody's looking at me and saying, well, wait a minute, there's bricks all over the place. You got a ball. Could we use your ball? Could we have fun with your ball? Can we play with you with the ball? And for me, the intrinsic value of that is, the exchange that is that I want to be just as happy and happy-go-lucky and having fun with the same children that are out there looking to do the same thing I'm doing, enjoy myself. And so the enjoyment of a contract comes with the continuity of exchanges where everybody has to see the same red ball, play with the same red ball, and emphasize to anyone else that joins that this is a red ball and we should all enjoy it. Now, you have your riffraff and your idiots that come in, and you can test them very easily. Almost off top, I can spot a fraud from a mile away. I toss them the ball, then I put a needle in their hand. I say, hey, how about you pop the ball? And if he pops the ball, then I know that anything I give to him is damaged goods. So I automatically eliminate him. This is how you do things on when you want to make sure that the people you want to be friendly with, you want as friends, and you want to have the benefit of enjoying those same friends. To ensure you're not disenfranchised, always try to itemize your losses. If you give a ball to someone else, you go home, you get a ball. You want to know who will be damaging to the cause, so that no one is upset. And then, of course, the group decides to dispense because they found other things to do. So ultimately, at the end of the day, when it comes down to the example of children, is that as long as there's a red ball available, that's cool. But always know that bringing other balls will create an intrinsic value for others to see that they're able to enjoy the same thing you're able to enjoy. Now, the more people that you realize are going to play with the red ball instead of creating bricks and throwing them at each other, well, that kind of enfranchises others to say, well, look how much fun they're having. Why not I join? And see, the more that you see the intrinsic value of collective playing, the less likely trouble will happen. The only troublemakers are the ones that are not spotted at the very beginning. Those usually are the ones that make things, they make things extremely difficult, or they sabotage the entire process. So then they have to bring in an adult, then the adult has to regulate the children, and then what happens? You no longer have red balls, you all have bricks, because the grown people say, well, we build things, and now we need you to build it. And you're sitting there and you're whining, you're saying, I'm a grown man, I'm a grown woman, as a child. And you're saying, this isn't fair. I want to enjoy myself. The problem is you have to have a unique system where a collective branding of negotiation based on the red ball. The thesis of it is that all of us want to toss the red ball to each other. So how are we going to benefit to ensure that once those balls duplicate, when everybody has what they need at the table, will they start doing, the more enticing things when it comes down to how much in portion you get when it comes to playing with your red ball. Say that you're limited because, IRS came in and started taking some of your money. All right? So your intrinsic value of the red ball doesn't seem so swell now. Now you gotta kind of make an excuse for all these problems that are happening at the firm because, well, you got to make sure that the value that the IRS wants is that they get a piece of the red ball, throw the action over their way, and then we wind up suffering because of it. We want to avoid outsiders at all costs. So the idea when you're dealing with an outsider is to have a collective brand, a collective idea. Even if your community created one entity, you want to suspend all of those that do not play with red balls to only play with red balls in that particular area. It's what I call the exclusionary clause. It keeps others that are unwanted, that are not going to value the red ball, and most importantly, are not going to value the institution of collectivism.
Let me ask you this question. If someone, again, is very interested in learning this, do you teach a course such that people can learn it so that they can apply it on a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. If you go to www.politicsandmoney, POLITICSANDMONEY, if you go there, INC.com. I don't know why I'm stuttering here. www.politicsandmoney, INC.com, POLITICSANDMONEY, INC.com. If you go there, I hold classes on Saturday, and pretty much because of I pretty much downgrade the classes to people's threshold of understanding of their education and what they want to know and how they need to know it. One is from 6 to 7, and the other one's 7 to 8, and then of course I do 2 hours altogether, but one is at a maturity level, and the other one's at an advanced level. So those that want to learn things as quickly as they can and kind of just go out and do what they want, this probably is not going to be for you, because this takes structuring. Your mind has to be structured around the entity, the way you think, the way you mold yourself on a day-to-day basis. You have to think like them in order to actively be able to distinguish yourself from a group of people that don't know what they're doing. So, sometimes it can be difficult. Sometimes it can be disenfranchising, because for you it's like, just how much information do I need to advance? And sometimes, especially if it's a collective brain, if it's 4 or 5 people that want to do one single thing, this can be done very quickly. Okay, you can structure yourself relatively quickly, and you can be in business in no time. Whereas if you're an individual and you're kind of in a rush and you just want simple things out of the way, you come to the mature class where you get a simple synthesis of these things that you need to say, okay, A, B, and C. These are the things that I do to structure myself. This is what I need to understand about it. And then when I go and do it, your advanced technological skills to it is going to be, okay, let me go back to class. Let me figure out, just like school. You go to school to learn your ABCs, and then you advance to the next level. In this, though, I structure it so that you don't have to come back and learn ABCs to me again. You don't have to learn science or math or anything of that nature to me again, because you're able to go out and exercise the same way that I've been able to exercise for some years now. And if you go to the source section, it's going to be at the very bottom. It's going to say classes at politicsandmoneyinc.com. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So if one is looking to have you to come out and speak to their organization or their group, how would they contact you?